Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kirby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. If you listen to this program any length of time, you know that we sometimes ask the what if questions. Oftentimes you've asked those. What if we had maybe a number of terrorist attacks simultaneously? Of course, we had one attack in Orlando this weekend, but what if there was an attack maybe on a train, and maybe another one on a parochial school, and another one maybe at a baseball field? And how would that affect our society, and what would be the implications of that? Some of you said, what would happen if we had some kind of crisis, maybe even an economic downturn or a terrorist attack like this, and the president decided to declare martial law and suspend the next elections? And so we've had those kinds of questions as well. And then some have said, what if, Texas one day decided that it should secede from the Union because of all this turmoil? Well, if you've ever had those questions, we're going to cover all of those, because in a sense, that is really the plot line of the book we're talking about today, Liberty's Last Stand. And it is written by America's greatest thriller writer, an individual who has been an author of 16 New York Times bestsellers, Stephen Coonts. Perhaps the one that you know the best would be Flight of the Intruder, which was on the New York Times bestseller list for 28 weeks. It also later became a blockbuster film, which Danny Glover and Willem Dafoe played those individuals. Of course, some of his other books would be The Assassin, The Disciple. He is a graduate of West Virginia University, as well as the University of Colorado School of Law, served in the Navy as well, and he joins us now by phone. Stephen Coonts, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Well, it's a pleasure to be with you, Kirby.
When I talk about the themes in your book, as you heard me mention, those are questions some of our listeners have asked. Is it possible that we would see multiple terrorist attacks? Is it possible that there could be the possibility of martial law being declared and an election being suspended? Even the possibility of Texas or other states, but we'll focus on Texas for just a minute, seceding from the Union. And that's really, in a sense, the plot line of your book, isn't it?
Yes, it is. I wrote it, obviously, in 2015, and it's taken 6 months to hit the bookstores. But the admission of Islamic refugees from Syria and other points in the Middle East with no real way to determine who they were, or, these people come without a scrap of paper with their name on it. And it just struck me that terror was a real possibility. Of course, we have the wide open border with Mexico where anybody can walk across, and anybody does. And so it's not a question of when it's going to happen, or if it'll happen. It's just a question of when.
Sure. And I might just mention, we're not going to take our time just to talk about the book, because each is a part of the book relates to something else. But for people that would love to read it, and by the way, it had some incredible reviews from people like Tom Clancy, the New York Times Book Review, and all sorts of others. And we have information about it on our website. I'm sure most people will be able to find it in their local bookstore, published by Regnery. But it does kind of follow, again, the former CIA director, Admiral Jake Grafton, as well as the CIA operative, Tommy Carmelini. And so you really kind of get into some of the issues of the day. But since you raised the issue of immigration, we're obviously going to get back to terrorism in just a minute. That's a concern because in the book, there is a real concern about the fact that we have open borders. And the argument is made that we should demand the Mexican government to stop allowing drug smugglers and those who are coming here illegal to cross the border. Of course, you're well aware we have a presidential candidate that says we need to do more than just tell them to stop allowing that to happen. We should actually build a wall and make them pay for it. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think that that's really the only way you're going to stop it. Mexico has no real incentive to close that border. And as you know, the Mexican government is corrupt, infamously corrupt, has been since Mexico was founded. And it's just not going to happen until we exert some serious political pressure on Mexico to make it happen.
And, of course, you mentioned not only Mexico, but Syria. Let's just talk about that for just a minute, because this is, again, even as we talk, the comments made just a few hours ago by Donald Trump at a rally in which he said it just doesn't make any sense to bring in people here who have grown up having heard of Sharia law. Even if they don't all believe in it, they certainly have been forced in some cases to accept it. And to bring people here where we really don't know what their motivations might be, and we don't really understand how this is going to play out in our country. So his proposal is that provide a safe haven for them near their country, so eventually they may be, after the defeat of the Islamic State, be able to return back to their country. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think that's a reasonable position. I would go a wee bit further. The problem with radical Islam is they don't believe in any of the values that we Americans believe in. They don't believe in democracy. They don't believe in women's rights. They're homophobes. They don't believe in educating women. And they don't believe in the secular state as we know it. And so consequently, they don't want to assimilate. They don't want to become Americans. And so the question, it's not a racial question, it's a cultural question. And my question is, why are we admitting people to America that don't believe in any of our values? Any of them.
And again, the first thing I would say is that there are some that have. I mean, I've met people that have a Muslim background, that have served in the military and law enforcement, came here simply because they wanted to be Americans. But that's the issue. There used to be a time, Stephen Coonts, not so long ago, where assimilation was one of the demands. In other words, if you came to this country, you would have to go through the process of naturalization. You'd have to really pledge your allegiance to this country. And over time, even people that maybe came from Poland or from Germany or from Italy or from wherever they might have come, they might have been Italian Americans, German Americans, but eventually they were just what? Americans. And so you have had some that have assimilated, but the sad reality is it's sometimes hard on the front end to figure out which ones might assimilate and which ones are going to basically create a kind of Balkan state within the United States.
Well, this is the same problem that Europe has at the present time, and it's not working very well over there. And the question is, do we want to Balkanize America? And I don't know that I have any answers, but I think we've got some serious problems that need to be talked about. And Liberty's Last Stand is a projection of what might happen if we continue to bury our head in the sand and not face the very real problems in this changing world.
We're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to spend a little more time talking a little bit out of the plot of the book, Liberty's Last Stand. It's a 500-page page-turner thriller by an individual that has had 16 of his books on the New York Times bestseller list, and an individual that has been endorsed by other writers like Tom Clancy and others. And so we're going to spend some time looking at this issue of terrorism, looking at the issue of whether or not once you have the terrorists light the fuse, whether a president itself is part of the problem and whether there is an attempt to remove him from office as he attempts to actually prevent elections. And then we'll even get into the issue of whether or not there would ever be a secession in the midst of all of that. It's a powerful book, and it raises lots of questions, and that's what we'll be talking about for this next hour. Stay tuned. We'll have more right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
Late last year, I wrote a commentary that made the case for impeachment of the current IRS director. There is even more evidence now that the IRS has been forced to provide a list of 426 conservative groups that were singled out by additional scrutiny when they applied for tax-exempt status. Might also mention that this list does not include 40 groups that opted out of the lawsuit that has been brought. So the actual number of groups targeted by the IRS was 466. Now, while I'm talking about numbers, it's worth mentioning that the original number used by the Treasury inspector was 298 groups. The IRS hasn't explained why the latest number is much larger. One theory is that when the IRS came under fire, they started adding names of liberal groups in order to hide what they were doing. Now, in my October commentary, I made the case for impeachment of the IRS director. He can be impeached for dereliction of duty because he failed to disclose the disappearance of the IRS emails germane to the congressional investigation. He can be impeached for failure to comply because he and his agency have not complied with the investigation. He can also be impeached for breach of trust because of his refusal to testify accurately before Congress and due to his failure to keep his promises to Congress. Representative Jason Chavez is the chairman of the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee. He says the IRS has lied to Congress and destroyed documents under subpoena. He's accused the IRS chairman of lies, obfuscation, and deceit. You know, this latest revelation that the IRS targeted 466 groups and attempted to delay their ability to receive tax-exempt status should seal the deal. In fact, it took a 3-year lawsuit from these Tea Party groups, and it took a ruling from the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals just to get the names of the groups that were mistreated. It's time for Congress to act. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
New York Times bestselling author Stephen Coonts with us today as we talk about his new book, Liberty's Last Stand, and using that to start a conversation about issues ranging from immigration to terrorism to even martial law and a police state and all sorts of issues. And if you'd like to join us at any point, 1-800-351-1212. Stephen, let's, if we can, maybe focus a little bit on what starts the movie, if you will. It's already a movie in my mind, but okay, the book, which I know is going to turn into a movie, is a multiple and simultaneous terrorist attacks. Because this is something that's always been in the back of my mind. I've always wondered why Al-Qaeda, ISIS, whatever, didn't try to do a number of things simultaneously. Because we are crippled even when there's one shoe bomber. We seem to be crippled when there is one shooting in Orlando. If you had something in America that was similar to, say, what happened in Paris, where you had simultaneous attacks, I wonder the impact that that would have on America. And your book begins with attacks in some of those vulnerable, soft targets in America, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. And there's not just some soft targets. The whole country's one giant soft target. You know, you could pick every aspect of American life, from schools to churches to anywhere people gather, at restaurants, nightclubs, wherever. We're all vulnerable. We're just victims waiting to be slaughtered by fanatics.
And it does seem to me that couldn't we learn some lessons from Israel? I've been to Israel twice now, and they live with something that we can't imagine, and that is that they are surrounded by probably 100 million Arabs in different countries. Not all of them intend them harm, but most do, and certainly some of the terrorists within their country intend them harm. And an explosion, a shooting, sadly, is fairly regular. Just while we are reeling from what happened in Orlando, they faced one last week in Tel Aviv. And that has required, though, IDF and others to actually walk around with arms and to walk around with whatever it is, an AK-47, an AR-15, or M16, whatever it is. If we indeed came through the kind of scenario in your book, I wonder what would happen, whether we would then have armed police on every corner or whether or not we would have a president declare martial law and suspend the elections. What are your thoughts?
Well, I thought that a terrorist incident would be perfect for the president to suspend the election. This president has been accused of wanting or to do that. And the Jade Helm exercises run for the past few years for the Federal Emergency Management Agency are really not about, the aftermath of a nuclear war, which they were 20 or 30 years ago. Today, they're about the putting down a right-wing uprising. And I think they've really stirred up the people of Texas last summer, and I expect they will again this summer. And these are, it's just ominous what we see happening.
And again, you mentioned Jade Helm. We've talked about that before with people like John Whitehead and others. The fact that we, in some cases, seem to be moving more and more to the possibility of a police state. So as you wrote this, did you see this as something that could happen in the next couple of weeks, years, decades? What are your thoughts?
Well, I thought it would. I said it in this summer. The action in the book takes place in August and early September of this summer. But it could happen anytime, and it's really a cautionary tale. We have so many people that feel like the government, the federal government, is totally out of control. And, your op-ed piece during the break about the IRS is a classic case. And, we have bureaucracies that really answer to nobody. Congress can't control them, and the executive doesn't seem to want to. And so people are they find they have no control of their life. And that's the definition of tyranny.
And I was saying that as we've gone through the political campaign so far, you can't really understand the success of two people who I would not have expected would do as well as they did. On the progressive side, Bernie Sanders. Who would have predicted even a few years ago that a person who describes himself as a democratic socialist, an individual who actually is an independent in the United States Senate and is calling for all sorts of socialist ideas, would do as well in the campaign as he did? And on the other side, Donald Trump. Who would have at all, even a year ago, much less 2 or 3 years ago, predicted that Donald Trump would be the presumptive nominee? Now, I recognize that the people that get behind them have two very different sets of values, but at the same time, undergirding that is this reaction from both sides, on the Democratic side and the Republican side, that business as usual doesn't work anymore. And in some respects, that kind of is one of the themes that undergirds your book as well, isn't it?
Yes, indeed it is. And in fact, I couldn't agree with you more. I think that the young people that look at Bernie Sanders are faced with in America in which job opportunities are evaporating. Jobs are going overseas. It takes more and more education to get what few jobs there are. The education is frightfully expensive. It gives these young people horrendous student loan debts that you wonder how in the world people could pay off $100,000 in student loans when they're 25 years old and they're working at Starbucks. And so he's tapped into that. And, of course, on the other side, I think we find that Mr. Trump has tapped into the fact that so many people out here in the heartland of America feel that the government is totally out of control. The bureaucracies are uncontrollable and irresponsible. I think most people, it was 80% the last time I saw it, believe that global warming is a hoax. And yet, the coal industry has been devastated in West Virginia, Eastern Kentucky, Wyoming, and so on. and we find that the utilities, the public utilities, are being forced to convert to more expensive sources of power for nebulous reasons, when there's really no scientific proof that man's activities have changed the climate.
Wow.
And so all this, maybe it doesn't matter if you're rich and your utility, your electric bill quadruples, but it does if you're not rich and you wonder how to pay it. And if you're a farmer out here and use vast amounts of electricity to run pivots and pump water, you find that the bills are eating up, your livelihood.
Well, and again, when so many people are living paycheck to paycheck, how many times have I written commentaries? One came out just a week or two ago. Another one's coming out next week that I've already written about, just illustrating again how, in some respects, economically vulnerable a number of people are. You can see why some of those issues certainly on the table. But we need to have one of our breaks, and when we come back, we'll take on one other issue, because one of the individuals in this particular novel says at one point, "I'm for independence. The people of Texas would be better off without the other 49 states. All the Texans, white, black, brown, for all the reasons that have been mentioned here this morning, we'd be better out without those fools in Washington." And so let's get into that issue as well. But as we go to our break, let me give some of you a chance to join the conversation. We've talked about immigration. We've talked about terrorism. We even had a little bit of a comment there about global warming. We've talked about the issue of whether or not martial law might be implemented. And all of those issues are ones that have actually surfaced in our conversations in the past. And those and many more are part of the theme of this 500-page novel, which I really think a lot of you would just enjoy reading during this summer. It will get you going. It will get your heartbeat going, and it will certainly get your anger maybe up a little bit, but it is a fascinating read by Stephen Coonts, Liberty's Last Stand. It is published by Regnery. We certainly would encourage you to look for it in your local bookstore, but if you can't find it in your bookstore or you want to order it right away, we have a link on our website there. You can get it in hardcover or Kindle, and for those of you that want to download it to your tablet, you can begin reading it before we even finish the broadcast today. But if you'd like to join us on the air, we would love to hear your comments about some of these issues we've put on the table. So let's open the phones. 1-800-351-1212, 1-800-351-1212. And in light of some of the things that have transpired even over the weekend, and some of the concerns we've had in the past and looking to the future, I thought Liberty's Last Stand would be a novel that you'd like to know about, and certainly it will provide us a context for some conversation. So again, join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212, and if you'd like to know more about Stephen Coonts or about this book, you can go to our website, pointofview.net, and as you do so, don't forget we have that banner there, Will You Stand Up for Truth, Give Now, and we're hoping that between now and the end of our fiscal year, which ends later this month, June 30th, that you will consider what you might do to help us end this this fiscal year in the black. So your gift of any size would be appreciated. And because we, of course, have a matching fund, that means your gift of $50 becomes $100. Your gift of $100 becomes $200. So let's take a break. We'll come back, talk a little bit about this idea of succession, and then we'll take your phone calls. We'll be back right after this.
I want you to be honest for a minute. 10 years ago, did you think the Supreme Court would ever dare to redefine marriage? That a president would threaten schools unless they permit males to shower with your daughters, told hospitals they must do abortions and sex change procedures or lose federal money? Did you honestly foresee any of this? We must stand together today and defend our liberties, or in the next few years, the nation will be transformed in ways we can't imagine. Please, please, join Kirby and Point of View Radio and defend what's right. We have a June 30th deadline, the end of our fiscal year, and it's critical we finish this month on firm financial terms. Partner with us. Give the most generous gift you can, and right now, it will be doubled up to $10,000. Give online at pointofview.net. or call 1-800-347-5151. Thank you for standing with us to defend faith and family. Pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. 5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kirby Anderson.
I'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Privileged to have with us today New York Times bestselling author Stephen Coonts as we talk about his book, Liberty's Last Stand. It deals with everything from terrorism to immigration to race riots, the attack on our Second Amendment rights, Texas declaring independence, martial law. Well, the list goes on and on and on. So if you'd like to join our conversation on any or all of those topics, 1-800-351-1212. Let's head out to Texas first. KBJS. Jordan, thank you for calling today.
Yes, sir. Thank you for taking my phone call.
I'd love to hear your comments.
Listening to the program.
Yes.
I was getting my car, trying to catch up, and I briefly heard y'all talking about, the reaction that America may have if something like a coordinated attack were to take place. And it's something that I've been worried about myself as a youth pastor at a church here in Texas. Should churches be more concerned with a possible coordinated attack during a Sunday morning service? In the state of Texas, we have upwards of 10 churches for every city that we have in the state. And, at any point in time, if they wanted to, they could walk in, unbeknownst to anybody that was there visiting a church, incognito. And then we weren't ready for it. Middle of service, they could open up. And so, there's a huge target painted on the backs of churches. And my question is, should churches be taking steps to prevent a possible attack on the church house?
Certainly. And Jordan, by the way, let me just mention before I turn it over to Stephen that we've done some programs, and we'll do another one on what churches can do to make those areas more safe. But oftentimes, Stephen, as you well are aware, we talked about soft targets. Sadly, a lot of churches are very soft targets, aren't they?
Indeed, they are. And fundamental Islam regards Christians as infidels and worthy of death. They're cutting their throats in the Middle East. They're murdering them. They're slaughtering them. And there's no doubt they'll do it here in the United States, given the chance. And we give them lots of chances.
But, Jordan, let me just mention that we have done some programs on that. So if you go to our website, pointofview.net, you could probably listen to some of those. But we'll do that again because there have been some shootings in some of these churches over the years. And there are some steps that obviously we can take and should take in every one of our church services. But the reality is, in a free society, unless you want everybody that comes into your church to go through a metal detector, it's going to be difficult. And, of course, most of us go to churches now where we have somebody either in uniform or plain clothes who is there actually providing some level of protection. But it's something, as a youth leader and as a youth pastor, you're really going to have to think about. And if we can provide you with some of that information, or probably we'll do another program on it coming up here pretty soon, I hope you'll take the time to learn some of that and apply it to your own church.
Thank you so much.
Well, appreciate your call. Let's, before we take another phone call, get into what would happen if the state of Texas were to declare independence, to secede from the Union. And that's another question, Stephen Coonts, that you raise in the book. And it's an interesting one because it surfaces from time to time. Then, of course, you have the specter of the president trying to prevent that, sending federal marshals down there, but also running into the Texas protection in a variety of different ways in terms of the National Guard and all the rest. So explain a little bit about that, because that was one other scenario that as we got into the book, I didn't necessarily expect. But again, I guess I should have seen it because you got a picture of the Texas flag on the cover of your book. Well, indeed.
The whole issue of will Americans fight Americans, I thought was one of the themes that needed to be brought forth in this book. And, I think that it's a very interesting question. This isn't a regional thing like the American Civil War was, in which, the South fought the North. This is really people on different sides of the cultural divide, if you will, this abyss that runs right through American life and is getting wider and deeper, even as we speak. As I thought about it, I thought Texas can certainly go it alone. In fact, I'd like to read you a paragraph in which the governor's wife pleads her case. She says, Texas has energy to sell to the world, a great banking system, world-class hospitals, automobile factories, cutting-edge high-tech industries, a solid agricultural base, and we're on the Gulf Coast, so we can import and export. Texas has an annual GDP of $1.6 trillion. That is a larger economy than the state of New York, just a little less than California. Texas generates roughly 10% of the economic activity in the United States. The Texas economy is a third larger than Mexico's, just 10% behind the United Kingdom. If Texas were an independent nation, ours would be the 12th largest economy on earth, a smidgen less than Canada, more than Australia, Spain, or Switzerland. And so Texas obviously could stand alone as an independent nation. And, it's whether the citizens of Texas want to be independent is really the question. And I think that if martial law does come, and if the Second Amendment rights are taken away, and if the elections are canceled, I think a great many people would feel that the time has come.
And again, one of the things that's interesting that you talked about just a minute ago is this idea of a civil war. During the Civil War, North against South, brother against brother sometimes. And would, Americans fire on other Americans is a very important question. But you did raise another one that's been in the news the last couple of days, so I think it's worth exploring, and that's the whole issue of the Second Amendment. That kind of is a theme that runs through there as well. Over the last couple of days, we've been told that this killing and this mass shooting, the worst in the history of America, and is not really a terrorist attack, and it really has nothing to do with Islam, but it has everything to do with an anti-gay sentiment, has everything to do with Christians and the NRA and conservatives and others that have created this climate of hate. And most importantly, if we're going to solve this, the solution is to implement instantaneously. I mean, right now, you've had debates in the United States Senate, a filibuster going on right now as we speak. Yesterday, during a moment of silence, where Paul Ryan called for a moment of silence, you have congressmen, interrupting it so that they can get their bills, some of which would ban assault weapons, others that would ban all sorts of various kinds of weapons, others that would extend and expand some background checks. We're dealing with this issue of the attack on the Second Amendment, and again, that's one of the themes that runs through your book, isn't it?
Yes, it is. For what it's worth, my humble opinion is that this terrorist attack in Orlando had absolutely nothing to do with guns, and it has everything to do with Islamic terrorism and jihad and this war on Western civilization. It's amazing that the administration wants to talk about guns instead of talk about what they can do to lessen the terrorist threat in America. And it's not guns, it's terrorism. And for what it's worth, if there had been more guns in that nightclub, maybe there wouldn't have been so many people killed.
It is amazing to me that the Secretary of Homeland Security, Jay Johnson, has said that the number one priority now for Homeland Security is gun control. And I would think the number one priority would be to bring terrorists to justice, to prevent other like-minded individuals from having the kind of impact that this individual did, and to prevent the kind of carnage that we read about. But nevertheless, sounds like right now for the government, the number one priority is gun control. Certainly the number one priority for Democrats, both in the House yesterday and in the Senate today, is gun control. So if nothing else, that's an issue that I suspect we'll be talking about for quite some time, don't you think?
Oh, indeed. And it's certainly never going to go away. But it needs to be said, the reason we have a Second Amendment is because the Founding Fathers believed that the best guarantee of liberty for a free people was to have a free people armed so they could defend themselves against the tyranny of the government. That's what it's for. It's not for so people can go deer hunting. It's or groundhog hunting or prairie dog shooting. It is to defend yourself against the government.
Let's take a break, and when we come back, we'll take some more phone calls. Your thoughts about gun control. One other issue that certainly surfaces in this book, Liberty's Last Stand. And as I mentioned just a minute ago, just so many different topics are addressed. A simultaneous terrorist attack, as well as eventually race riots and all sorts of things unfolding in the streets. As a result, of course, the president declaring martial law, suspending the elections, then the decision by Texas to declare independence. Questions raised then about whether or not to actually send troops, and then what kind of confrontation would take place there, all the while trying to abolish the Second Amendment and change some of the laws that we have in our country. It's all part of this new book, Liberty's Last Stand. And if you'd like to join our conversation with your comments, 1-800-351-1212. We'll be back right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes, and let me just mention, for those of you concerned about church safety, we talked about that just a minute ago with Jordan. We've had Jimmy Meeks on this program many times before. He's not only a police officer, but a minister, and he and Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman are part of what is called sheepdogsafetytraining.com, and we've had them on the program. We'll do that again and talk about different things churches can do to protect themselves in light of even some of the things that have transpired over the weekend. But let's take some more phone calls and give you a chance to join our conversation. We'll head to Louisiana this time, KPAE. Ricky, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Kirby, I wanted to ask your guest there. It's amazing. I listen to almost all the Christian radio stations. I don't have a TV, so I get my news from Christian radio stations like yours. Yours is one of the best ones out there. Of course, AFA. The only program I listen to is Rush, and it's kind of amazing, but when Brian comes on after Rush, he kind of repeats what Rush just said. But anyhow, why is, except for one Christian radio station, Fortress of Faith, Tom Wallace, everybody else, I've never heard any of them state that, and I guess for whatever reason, maybe they're afraid to get audited or something, or IRS will get on them or whatever. But, I mean, it's really obvious after 7 years. I mean, it's the most simpleton that Obama is a communist sodomite Muslim that wants to overthrow America. How come nobody gets that?
Well, what about this? Stephen, you certainly have some things to say about the current president in the book.
Yes, I called him Barry Soetoro, but it is obviously a very paper-thin disguise for Barack Obama. And I think that he is really trying to destabilize traditional American life. And he wants a socialist country. He wants to increase the number of Democratic voters any way he can. And, we've expanded food stamps, welfare, and all this other stuff, but the jobs are leaving. And so I don't know how this whole house of cards can keep going if you have only the workers have to pay to sustain all the people that can't find jobs or don't want to find jobs or are unqualified to work in the economy that that is evolving.
Yeah, again, it's the old line, if you've got too many people in the wagon and not enough people pulling the wagon, it doesn't work very well. Now, some of these individuals, a lot of people get upset with that because they say, well, I earned that. Well, I'm not talking about people that have worked their entire lives, paid into Social Security, and are receiving those benefits. I'm talking about the individuals that have never paid anything into it or benefiting from it in ways that were never intended by those individuals that have started those entitlement programs. But let's take a few more phone calls because we've got a lot of people want to talk to you. So we'll go to Maine now, WSEW. Marcia, you're on with Stephen Coonts.
Yes, hi there. I'm calling from the lovely state of Maine. A lot of people have guns here. The gun control issue, I believe people should have guns that are qualified to have them. Here we are, we drive vehicles that are lethal weapons, and guns, people just go out and buy them. I mean, there should be insurance on a gun. There should be a test you take. I mean, it's as a car, a lethal weapon. So that right there is the first start in controlling who gets their hands on the gun.
I don't think so. Marcia, I appreciate that. Stephen, any comments before I take another call?
Well, the problem is that the right to own a gun is a constitutional right. And sort of like free speech, the right to worship where you choose, the right to have your grievances aired in a court of law. And, so you're dealing with a constitutional right that's designed to allow the public to defend themselves against the tyranny of the government.
Wow. Let's go to Ohio this next time, and we'll talk to Sheldon. Sheldon, thank you for joining us today. You're on with Stephen Coonts.
Hi, how you doing?
Hi, Sheldon.
I want to first thank you for your show. We need more people like you that are standing up for what's right.
Thank you.
And I find odd is how President Obama was telling us how we should feel about the immigrants coming in the country. We shouldn't be scared and afraid, but the first sign of a threat of the White House, they shut down the White House.
That's interesting. Yeah.
Next,
go ahead.
Next, when we're trying to protect our borders, which is a joke, why do they put up jugs of igloos with fresh water in them every day along the border for the people coming in?
Yeah,
that
that's
doesn't say,
done out of compassion, supposedly. But again, it sends a signal of saying, come on in, right?
That's what, yeah.
Yep.
I mean, and then there was a guy on the TV show when one of these riots took place. He said it's his job to go to these cities and create riots.
Yep.
He gets paid to do that.
That's right. And they'll show up at the Trump rally that's coming to this area where we're broadcasting from right now. Let me take one more phone call. I wish I had time for everybody, but just before Stephen Coonts has to go, let's go to Texas again. Gabriel, what would you like to add to our conversation?
Yes, hi. Well, first of all, thanks for your show and praise Jesus Christ for what he does for us. And what I want to add is, first of all, yes, I believe in the Second Amendment. Thanks for the Second Amendment. And second of all, first, we have a God-given right to defend ourselves. In Leviticus it says, Jesus himself said, if you don't have a sword, sell your cloak and buy one. So why don't Christians follow that law that Jesus said, sell your cloak and buy a sword? And a sword meaning a modern firearm. We have a God-given right to defend ourselves. Sure. Why don't the Christians follow that? I mean, all this, nobody says anything about the Christians or Jews getting killed, but they always praise, the Orlando massacre. Why? Yes, gays, that's a sin. That's an internal sin by God himself and Jesus Christ. But why don't the Christians stand up and say, yeah, you know what, let's start.
Yeah, we need to defend ourselves. And again, you ask why they don't use that verse. Most people don't know it's there. I know many times when somebody says, well, I don't know that we're really supposed to have firearms. I say, well, what about when Jesus tells them to go out and to buy a sword? And they go, I've never read that. And I said, well, and I give them the verse, and then they go, I've never heard that before. So that's part of the answer. But Stephen, just before we run out of time, I wanted to talk about your book. It's obviously in the bookstores, and a lot of people can find it there. If not, we have a couple of ways in which they can order it. We've got a link, of course, so people can order it online, but also we have a link to your website, Coonts.com. It's COONTS.com, so people can get some information there, and this is something that you really want to start a conversation about. And by looking at my computer here, I can see you filled up the phone lines. We could probably have gone a whole nother hour, but nevertheless, I only ask you to be with us for 1 hour. But tell people what they'll find when they land on your website, because there's some great resources there as well.
Well, the books that I've written, and there's 37 of them, are all on there. But Liberty's Last Stand, there's actually an excerpt on the website.
Right.
And there's also 2 alternative beginnings, neither of which made the cut. And so, a novel like this is a work in progress. It got written and rewritten, and scenes were repeatedly tried out and either kept or rejected. And so a lot of that is on there, and the explanations of why the book was written, what I hope people get out of it. And if nothing else, I hope to entertain them, but also make them think a little bit.
Well, that's what we want to do here.
In my view, America is on an unsustainable course. We can't, and this cultural divide is getting worse, and the government is out of control. And I think that. Sure, I'm glad I'm as old as I am, but I fear for my children.
I would say so. Thank you for joining us today. Again, we have a link so that you can follow him on Facebook, Twitter, find his website, and all the rest. Stephen Coonts, thanks for being with us today here on Point of View.
Well, thank you very much, Kirby, and God bless you.
We're going to take a break, and in the second hour today, Jim Daly, president of Focus on the Family, will be with us, and we'll continue our conversation. If you'd like to know more about the book or even know how to support this ministry, go to the website pointofview.net. Lots of great resources. We'll be back right after these messages.
I want you to be honest for a minute. 10 years ago, did you think the Supreme Court would ever dare to redefine marriage? That a president would threaten schools unless they permit males to shower with your daughters, told hospitals they must do abortions and sex change procedures or lose federal money? Did you honestly foresee any of this? We must stand together today and defend our liberties, or in the next few years, the nation will be transformed in ways we can't imagine. Please, please, join Kirby and Point of View Radio and defend what's right. We have a June 30th deadline, the end of our fiscal year, and it's critical we finish this month on firm financial terms. Partner with us. Give the most generous gift you can, and right now, it will be doubled up to $10,000. Give online at pointofview.net. or call 1-800-347-5151. Thank you for standing with us to defend faith and family. Pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kirby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kirby Anderson.
As I mentioned yesterday, we are privileged to have with us now Jim Daly, president of Focus on the Family. His new book, Marriage Done Right, One Man, One Woman. And it really relates to so many different things that we've been talking about here on Point of View. The first section, the first 8 chapters, deal with the institution of marriage. We'll certainly get into that, and that's sort of the public policy issues we talk about so often. Part 2 is about your own marriage, and we certainly do a lot of programs to really help you have a stronger marriage. And even in the midst of that, it talks about the issue of manhood, and I thought how appropriate this is just before Father's Day to talk about what it really means to be a husband, a father in a Christian marriage. And then a very, very helpful third section where you have kind of a personalized marriage assessment and even kind of a look at the future of marriage. So we're going to do our best in this 1 hour to cover this book. It deserves even more time, but that's what we have given to it. Jim Daly, of course, is very familiar to our listeners as the president of Focus on the Family, organization, of course, that is many times won Program of the Year just a couple of years ago. Matter of fact, won that from National Religious Broadcasters, heard by about 5.5 million listeners. Some of his previous books, Refocus, Living a Life That Reflects God's Heart, really talks about how to engage the culture. And of course, this one, Marriage Done Right, One Man, One Woman. And we have information about him. It is published by Regnery and is certainly available at your local bookstore, but we have a place for you to order it, and also, of course, a link to Focus on the Family. Jim Daly, welcome back to Point of View.
Hey, Kirby, it's great to be with you from the Rockies.
Yes, and it's so fun because I was watching an interview you did the other day with John Fuller. Now, John Fuller and I met each other at KVNE in Tyler, and that is a long time ago. So anyway, I've known him, and it was fun to watch another interview you were doing. And certainly it was all about this book, so I always like to see a little bit about how the author communicates the book. But, of course, this book is just a great resource to stand alone. And I'd like to think we might even start about that, because you talk about early on in the book that you keep getting these questions from these secular reporters. When is Focus on the Family going to pivot, which is their way of saying, when are you going to get with the times and recognize that marriage is not one man and one woman, but marriage is anything that you actually think it can be?
I think it's one of the central questions in this whole debate, because what the people that support same-sex marriage fail to recognize, because it's very inconvenient, is that we're not the authors of the text. We're the followers of the text. Yes. So the difficulty in that regard, I remember I was at a book signing on Refocus, my previous book, right. And a gay activist asked me that question. He said, when are you going to kind of catch up in the Christian community to human sexuality in the 21st century and kind of evolve in this area? And I said, boy, it's nice of you to make me the editor of the book. Unfortunately, I'm not. All I can do is follow it to the best of my ability. And frankly, there's many things in there that I don't like either. It's not homosexuality, but there are things that I do as a human being that remind me that I'm a sinner saved by grace. Right. And so I think it's one of the great difficulties for the other side to understand what is that driving conviction. It's not hatred. It is not that. There are people that act in that manner, but that's a minority of Christians. I don't know many of those folks. Most people are acting out of their conviction that this is not right, and therefore they are compelled to say something. So that's unfortunate. I grieve with the loss of life in Orlando and those kinds of things. That should never be the action of a faith-filled person. But yeah, that's where it's at.
It certainly is. And you are such a perfect spokesperson for this, because I know, Jim, sometimes people might, if they don't know your background, say, well, you support marriage because you came from a really nice family and you had a good father and a mother, and, you've seen the positive aspect of marriage. You don't know what it's like to come from a broken home. Well, if you don't know that, and I recognize that maybe some people don't know your story, so could you give us a thumbnail sketch? Because that's another reason why I think God has used you to really address marriage, because you have seen the other side of it, haven't you?
Well, I have, and I'm thankful to God, and I give God the credit for pulling me out of that mire that I was in, kind of the stench. But my father divorced my mom when we were 5. He was an alcoholic, and my mom was a single mom in the 60s with 5 kids. She remarried when I was 8 to a very militant stepfather. Yeah. Who was a former drill sergeant, if you can imagine. And a year and a half later, my mom died of cancer, and Hank, our stepfather, walked out on the family the day of the funeral. We got back from the funeral. He had his bags packed. He said, I can't take the pressure. I'm moving out. And I remember as a 9-year-old thinking, well, what do I do? And I got to go to foster care. And I was there for a year. It was a disaster. It was I'm grateful we had a roof over our head, but my goodness, it was dysfunctional and very dangerous for me to be there. And after that, my biological father reemerged. I went with him. He was still struggling with alcoholism. I lived with him for a year. He then died, and I moved in with my brother, Dave, for junior high and high school. And he was 20 and, trying to figure out life for himself. So in that regard, I wasn't born with that silver spoon. And I think from that perspective, I can speak with conviction. In fact, 3rd grade, I was in Compton, California. I went to Star King Elementary School on Artesia Boulevard. And, so I've been in the hood. I've been all over, yes. Born in West Covina. And from that perspective, there are a lot of big issues that we need to tackle. I think at the core of all of them, along with President Bush, as well as President Obama, as I've talked with him on a couple of occasions, that families are the core to a strong culture. And we have got to think of a way to strengthen family today because it is in desperate need.
Well, again, your story is just incredible. Have a bachelor's degree, an MBA, of course, honorary doctoral degrees, of course, have run Focus on the Family. And I hope that's an encouragement to some listening, even that say, well, you don't know how bad my family circumstances are. Well, yes, Jim Daly does, yeah, and probably has one that's worse than your circumstance right now, and there's certainly things God can do. And we're going to take a break in just a minute, but we might also come back and talk about, as you have with John Fuller and even on Focus on the Family, about the fact that when you have to sort of be an orphan and be on your own, you have to be sort of a problem solver, which is a good thing, but sometimes in marriage it prevents intimacy and prevents you from being a good listener to the wife and those. But also want to spend a little bit of time just talking about the fact that if you really look at marriage just from a secular point of view, even take individuals that, quite frankly, could not sign the doctrinal statement of your church. There are individuals that are basically saying, marriage is best when it's between one man and one woman. It's best when indeed you are raised by an intact family. And all the things that we have been saying from the Bible for millennia are now really being verified as well by some of the scientific research and social scientific research. So this is a book that really ministers at a number of different levels. It helps us with some of the policy issues we talk about here at Point of View. It's also going to help you in your own marriage to understand exactly what might be taking place. And it even gives you a little bit of an assessment so that you can kind of see how you and your spouse are doing. And so this is a book I would put in the hands. Matter of fact, you could still probably get it real quickly if you'd want to put in the hands of that special person during Father's Day. It might be a brother, it might be a son, it might be a father, or it might be an uncle. It could be any person like that. But I think everybody will benefit from the great resources and material available through Focus on the Family. So let's take a break. Jim Daly with us today. We're talking about his new book, Marriage Done Right. It's published by Regnery Faith. Look for it in your local bookstore, but we have links to, of course, Focus on the Family on our website, pointofview.net. We'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
Late last year, I wrote a commentary that made the case for impeachment of the current IRS director. There is even more evidence now that the IRS has been forced to provide a list of 426 conservative groups that were singled out by additional scrutiny when they applied for tax-exempt status. Might also mention that this list does not include 40 groups that opted out of the lawsuit that has been brought. So the actual number of groups targeted by the IRS was 466. Now, while I'm talking about numbers, it's worth mentioning that the original number used by the Treasury inspector was 298 groups. The IRS hasn't explained why the latest number is much larger. One theory is that when the IRS came under fire, they started adding names of liberal groups in order to hide what they were doing. Now, in my October commentary, I made the case for impeachment of the IRS director. He can be impeached for dereliction of duty because he failed to disclose the disappearance of the IRS emails germane to the congressional investigation. He can be impeached for failure to comply because he and his agency have not complied with the investigation. He can also be impeached for breach of trust because of his refusal to testify accurately before Congress and due to his failure to keep his promises to Congress. Representative Jason Chavez is the chairman of the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee. He says the IRS has lied to Congress and destroyed documents under subpoena. He's accused the IRS chairman of lies, obfuscation, and deceit. You know, this latest revelation that the IRS targeted 466 groups and attempted to delay their ability to receive tax-exempt status should seal the deal. In fact, it took a 3-year lawsuit from these Tea Party groups, and it took a ruling from the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals just to get the names of the groups that were mistreated. It's time for Congress to act. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
We're pleased to have with us today Jim Daly, as again, he is the president of Focus on the Family, host of the daily broadcast heard by more than 5 million individuals throughout the week, and this new book, Marriage Done Right, One Man, One Woman. If anything, we can see, Jim, the incredible amount of statistics and social science research that tell us two things. Number one, marriage is good for the individuals and for the children, and divorce is devastating for those children. And it seems to me that that alone should cause us to, if nothing else, as a society, emphasize how important marriage is in our society and how beneficial it is to the individuals who participate in it.
I totally agree. When you look at it, in fact, in the book, I quote Cosmopolitan magazine, which is no bastion of Christian thought, but
right.
they gave 7 reasons to get married, and I'll point out a couple.
Sure.
1, marriage makes your relationship more meaningful. It gives you a feeling of rootedness and calmness. It makes you feel and act like a team. There are financial and other practical benefits to marriage that are derived by the married couple. The one that many people move toward is you'll have a better sex life. And so, when you look at that, that's the context of marriage. The reason it's all better is because it's God's design. And I think, as you said, social science for decades has proven that not perfectly married couples, imperfect married couples are the happiest conjoined human beings in this world. And I think we need to do something to pursue building up of marriage. Kirby, in Australia, if you have children under 18 in the home and you file for divorce, it's compulsory for you to do 6 months of marriage counseling before the state will recognize that divorce. I think that's brilliant. I mean, that is one small step to keeping a family together. What they realize, and we obviously fail to realize, is that poverty, the number one predictor of poverty, is divorce. Women and children in marriages, when in poverty, it's only 6%. But once divorce occurs, women and children, the percent in poverty goes up to 36%. And so it's the number one predictor and promoter of poverty. And if we're all about poverty and stamping out poverty, then we should be about keeping marriages together.
That's for sure. Again, some of the material from Cosmos is in the book, as well as some of those statistics about divorce. Just before we move on, let's talk about cohabitation, because you talk about that those rates are soaring. And one of the things I've known, Jim, is occasionally when I teach at a seminary or Bible college, we'll get into this because I'll have professors and especially pastors say, I'm really running into a problem even inside the church, because I'll find out that somebody's living together and I'll share with them some of the scriptural principles. And they'll go, well, okay, but are there any other reasons why we shouldn't live together? And it's almost like, well, the Bible should be sufficient, but if it's not, you've got the Marriage Project out of Rutgers and all sorts of other research that shows that if you live together before marriage, you increase your likelihood of being divorced by at least an additional 50%. And yet we have a mindset today that says, well, you wouldn't buy a pair of shoes without trying them on. You wouldn't buy a car without a test drive. And I always point out, yeah, but if you decide not to buy the car, you don't leave your belongings in the trunk of the car, and the car doesn't feel alienated, and you don't develop the wrong kind of attitudes towards the car. But nevertheless, cohabitation's an issue, and it really relates back to your question, why marry at all, doesn't it?
Well, and what you said should stun people. Okay, so the line is cohabiting. It'll allow me to test drive, and I'll know whether or not we're compatible in doing so. But the likelihood of that couple then divorcing is much higher than if they just got married and they have the commitment to marriage from the beginning. I think that takes that whole argument, right? It takes the legs out from under it. And so when you look at it, not only that, but cohabiting couples, if there's children involved, typically a child of the mom and the boyfriend's living in the house, that child is 9 times at risk, nine times greater at risk for injury or death.
Yes.
Because boyfriends typically don't like children. I mean, I'm just saying that it's not a safe place generally. And one thing, Kirby, is we're talking about all these different data points. People do succeed even in that environment. And I'm thinking of the single mom or the single dad who's going, great, pile on. I know my job's already tough. I'm the product of a single mother. So I know that it can be achieved, but it takes, I feel like it takes the intervention of the Lord and a real resilience on your part to want to do things differently than what you saw modeled in your own home.
Well, and that's why it's wonderful to have, as we have many times had James Robison here, or of course Ben Carson, or yourself, or others that say, look, you know, it can be done and needs to be done. But let's talk about the importance of a man in the home, because that's kind of what we're getting to. In Chapter 4, Reformed and Transformed, this week we've tried occasionally, even in the midst of all the controversy that came out of Orlando, to look ahead to Father's Day. And I think it's important to recognize how important the father is in the home. And number 2, you talk a great deal about what real manhood is, and maybe it's time for us to man up. What do you mean?
Well, especially with the impact of a father in the home. When you look at, again, the data, which is critical, 71% of all high school dropouts come from a fatherless home. 85% of all youth in prison come from fatherless homes. And 90% of homeless and runaway children come from fatherless homes. 90%. So think of the impact of a dad in the home. We talk a lot, and rightfully so, about the importance of mom. But you know what? Dads have a huge contribution to play. And I think it's been one of the most overlooked contributions in our culture, mostly because men are sidelined in being men. They have to be feminine in order to be recognized in the culture as having any kind of value. And I think being that real man is all about doing what Christ has told us to do, and that is to lay down our lives for our spouses.
Yes.
That's not easy to do. I struggle. I'm the president of Focus on the Family, and I struggle with that pretty much every day. You know, and I think the irony of marriage, and this is the bigger context of the book, Marriage Done Right, especially for the Christian community. marriage is not a contract. It's not until I feel satisfied or as long as I feel we're happy, we're good. It's a covenant. So I'm with you until death or through it all, sickness and poor, if we're poor, what have you. That's a covenant. And I think right now in the culture, men particularly with pornography and all the other addictions that are there, we're giving up easily on marriage, and wives too, but I want to speak to the men. We're giving up far too easy in the church on our marriages. And we've got to double down, as you said, and really get with what the Lord is trying to do in marriage, and that is to make us more like Him. And what is that? Selfless. And it's really hard because our flesh wants to go to selfish and be me-oriented, and we have to fight that every day. You want to see true faith, true Christianity, happy marriages, look at two people who give to one another with a grateful heart.
Very, very good. I might just mention yesterday in the first hour, we did have Jim Cody in here. We were talking about Masters Men and how you can build a good men's ministry in the church and how you can certainly understand what it means to be a man based upon biblical principles. And so those are certainly important issues. I'm going to take a break, but when I come back, I'd love to talk a little bit about why children need both a mother and father. And you begin the quote with Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan. He wrote that piece that you have there in 1993, but I remember all the way back in the 1960s, he was warning about what would happen with the welfare programs that we have that might have had an impact, maybe sometimes unintentionally, of chasing the father out of the home and the impact that that has had. And it just once again reminds us that we, I think, all understand that marriage as an institution has been under attack, and it certainly is not doing well. And this is why I think this is going to be a very helpful book to understand not only the policy issues, but the practical issues, which we'll get to after the break, that really are things that you need to do to strengthen your own marriage. And it's a resource that I hope that you would pass on to others. Maybe you have children and grandchildren that have grown up and they really don't have a biblical view of marriage because they live in this culture that has conformed them to this secular view. This is a book that I certainly hope that we can put in your hands as well. That's why we have a link to Focus on the Family on our website, pointofview.net. We have information about this book, and you might be able to find it in your local bookstore, but if not, there's a way to download it to your Kindle and begin reading even before we finish the broadcast today. So all available at the website, pointofview.net. It reminds you that between now and the end of our fiscal year, which ends June 30th, we certainly hope that some of you will join with us to support this ministry. And if you've learned some things over the last hour or so today that maybe you've never heard before and maybe understand the importance of these kinds of broadcasts, you might consider what you might do to give to this ministry. And we have a matching fund, so that means your gift of $100 becomes $200. A gift of $250 becomes $500. So take the time to click on that banner, and if you can give, we would greatly appreciate it. And when we come back, we'll also open up the phones. I suspect some of you would like to talk with Jim Daly, and you're welcome to do so. We're going to spend most of our time talking with him, but we might have time for you as well. Marriage Done Right, Jim Daly with us, and we'll be back with more right after this.
I want you to be honest for a minute. 10 years ago, did you think the Supreme Court would ever dare to redefine marriage? That a president would threaten schools unless they permit males to shower with your daughters, told hospitals they must do abortions and sex change procedures or lose federal money? Did you honestly foresee any of this? We must stand together today and defend our liberties, or in the next few years, the nation will be transformed in ways we can't imagine. Please, please, join Kirby and Point of View Radio and defend what's right. We have a June 30th deadline, the end of our fiscal year, and it's critical we finish this month on firm financial terms. Partner with us. Give the most generous gift you can, and right now, it will be doubled up to $10,000. Give online at pointofview.net or call 1-800-347-5151. Thank you for standing with us to defend faith and family. Pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kirby Anderson.
Continue our conversation today with Jim Daly, president of Focus on the Family. The book is entitled Marriage Done Right, One Man, One Woman. And I'd love to focus a little bit of time on why children need both a mother and father. And, of course, you start with a quote from Daniel Patrick Moynihan, who for actually decades was saying, you know, having an intact family is really important. But, Jim, you start out by telling the story of playing under Friday night lights and what a great time to play football. But one particular night was not much fun for you, and that was Dad's night. And here you're playing high school football, and the idea is they would call out the name of the player, and each dad would run onto the field to hug or high-five their son. And then when they come to you, Jim Daly's father is not present tonight. I mean, if nothing else, I know now with all these broken homes, they probably don't do it anymore. But talk about digging a knife into your stomach as a young man. That had to be painful, and it illustrates, again, the difficulty that young men face sometimes when dad's no longer present.
Yeah, and there was so much loaded into that moment, that picture that you talk about. I never had any ill will for the guys that had their dads coming out. I thought it was great. I just wished I was one of them.
Yes.
So I'm sorry to hear that, and I think you're right. They have kind of discontinued that because too many young men out on the football field on Friday nights at high schools don't have their dads to stand with them. But what an incredible picture. I think there were maybe two of us on the varsity football team at that time that didn't have dads to stand. And today it probably would be about 60% that would be out on the field. It's very sad. And, I think for the most part what Moynihan was onto, what a brilliant mind he was. He looked down the line. He was alarmed that the African-American out-of-wedlock birth rate and child rearing by single women in the African-American community had risen to a high of 28%. When he wrote that report. I think it was 26 or 28%. And he was sounding the alarm then. Well, today it's like 78%. Yes. I mean, think of the difference and all of the compounding problems with that. And we have it in every ethnicity, whether it's black, white, Latino. The breakdown of marriage is causing the fallout of single-parent moms mostly, and also dads. And it's a real tragedy. And the reason, to get to the core of the issue, the reason children need both, and this is one of our defenses for adoption of gay parents. Do we hate gay people? No. But when you place a child in gay adoption, that child is deprived by the state of either a mother or a father, one of the two. And the brilliance, again, of God's design in marriage is that the genders bring different perspectives. I know that from Gene and I. Oh, sure. Gene and I are totally different. I mean, I roughhouse. Thankfully, we have two boys. We have two foster kids with us right now. And the daughter is throwing me for a loop because I'm not sure how to react to girls.
Used to those boys. All that testosterone around there, yeah.
Yeah, she wants to sit down and have a tea party and talk about the day. And I'm going, who are you, a grown woman? And my boys want the rough and tumble. They want to wrestle downstairs in our basement. They want to do some weightlifting.
Yes.
They want to do all kinds of stuff that's physical. And what they get from me is that mom is not so much into that. She's not going to roughhouse with the kids like that. She's the one that's going to sit and talk with them about where they're at. They may go do things together, but it's very different. And the point of it all, it's not the separation of people. I hate the movements that divide us. Oh, how can we unite? It's self-evident that God intended for this to be a male and a female, to be committed in marriage. And the Bible talks about it, but all the social science supports it. And I think, the evidence is there that we should be building it up. Listen, 97% of us are in the heterosexual community in this country. 3% are in the homosexual community. And they have had some astronomical gains in this culture, in this democracy. And you have to be in awe, even though you may disagree with it, of how quickly they were able to obtain that over the last 40 or 50 years. But the breakdown of marriage started in the 60s with the pill and with President Reagan, who was then governor in 1969, signing in the no-fault divorce.
Yes.
And then you had Roe v. Wade, which, if you had an affair or you out of wedlock, you had a pregnancy and the pill didn't work, then you could take care of it through abortion. So we broke down what was called the iron triangle of marriage, sex, and children. We just totally destroyed it, and we're reaping the whirlwind of it today. And it's going to continue to get worse. And, I think for that, we have to recognize the genders. In the Christian church, we have to build up the gender-specific roles that we play, male and female. Doesn't mean that women have to stay barefoot and pregnant. That's not it at all. That's what those who oppose faith-oriented definition of marriage would say. But listen, if men are living well, their wives are going to be lifted up in an incredible way, and vice versa. Wives will respect their husbands, and that union will work well, and there'll be joy in it.
And again, to illustrate the point that you've made throughout the book, you can go to the various family scholars that have appeared in the various journals, and ones from the University of Texas or Minnesota, Chicago, Berkeley, Rutgers, whatever, and you have 9 different benefits that come to children that actually live within an intact family culture. Living longer, healthier, doing better in school, more likely to attend college, less likely to live in poverty, less likely to get in trouble with the law, all the way down this long, long list of things, which again, I think are really encouraging because, Jim, what we're finding is that many times the social science research here, almost all the time, I should probably say, the social science research is actually coming back to validate what we've been talking about from biblical perspectives for many, many years.
Well, thousands. Stable home probably did well compared to others that did not. And, again, I'm thinking of that child who's in that spot or that parent who's a single parent. Believe me, you can create an environment where your child can rise above their circumstances and do well. I'm evidence of that. But at the same time, we should be aiming and encouraging families, marriages, to aim for the better choice. And, University of Chicago did a study. They had about half the group that went through with divorce. The other half pulled back, got counseling. 5 years later, they looked at both groups. Those that divorced were less happier 5 years later. 85% that stuck through their difficulties in their marriage, worked out their problems, they were happier. And I think, Kirby, in this culture, we're so fast food oriented and so down to what are the benefits that I derive out of this relationship, out of this product purchase, whatever. And we're so conditioned for that it's seeped and even gushed in to our perspective on marriage to the point where it's just a contract now. You know what? If I'm no longer happy, if you're not satisfying me in some area of our relationship, I think I might leave. And that's not what marriage is about. It's covenant marriage. It means we're going to go the distance in love. And I'm telling you, I've been at the bedside of people who are dying, old guys in their 80s, who are saying, man, I'm so thankful I stayed with my wife. My wife, her brother committed suicide, and something very powerful my wife told me 15 years ago when he did that. She said, Craig found a permanent solution to a temporary problem. And that is true in our marriages. We are going for permanent solutions called divorce for temporary problems that are called heartache. And we've got to fight through them, especially in the Christian church, so that we can come out on the other side more intimately connected to each other, more trusting in the Lord, more dependent on Him, and probably in our character, more like Him.
Very, very well said. Might just mention, too, as we go to the break here, another chapter on In Good Times and Bad, and you tell the story of Doug Groteis, used to be on staff with me at Probe Ministries, and I've known Doug and Becky for some time. Of course, since we speak a lot on apologetics here, we've had him on the program many times as well, but as many of our listeners know, since he's been on the program with us before, his wife has dealt with all sorts of issues, and even last time I was with both of them, the dementia has really struck and really affected, and he's just one of many examples, I know, Jim, that we can use of individuals who, in the midst of circumstances, might have had a justification from a secular point of view to walk away and don't. And so let me again recognize that sometimes it isn't always easy to stay committed and to understand the importance of a covenant marriage. But as Jim was saying just a minute ago, there are people every day going to the divorce courts to get rid of a problem that other couples have chosen to deal with and address and to love each other and become more intimate because of that particular issue. So if this is something that you think is the solution to your problem, it's a permanent solution to a temporary problem. But even if it's a long-term, ongoing problem like dementia or Alzheimer's, just again, think through those issues. And this book, I think, is going to be very helpful. But when we come back, I want to talk briefly, we won't have a lot of time to cover all of them, the 12 traits of highly successful marriages, and really look at a marriage assessment, because this is going to be very helpful and practical in your own marriage. And so let me encourage you to take the time to learn from this book. It's entitled Marriage Done Right, One Man, One Woman. Jim Daly with us. We'll continue our conversation with him right after these messages.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes, and we're talking today with Jim Daly, president of Focus on the Family. And I thought we might, just for a few minutes, talk about some of the secrets to a great marriage, and especially what you have is a personalized marriage assessment. Now, we don't have a chance to go through all of those, but it seems to me that if people begin to pay attention to some of those words that almost seem old-fashioned, like cherish and commitment and spend time coping and all those are, some of those words almost sound like something from the age of buggy whips and horse-drawn carriages, but these are still very important principles in the 21st century, aren't they?
They really are, and there's nothing new under the sun, Kirby. I mean, let's face it, mankind has been around a long time, and we've gone through these things before, and I think we're going to rise above these things again. I have a faith in the fact that the truth of God is right there. It's not hidden or buried. He allows it to be on the surface so all can see it. We may kick some sand over it at times to try to obfuscate it and put it in the dark, but the truth of God is never going to be hidden. It really isn't. And so in that regard, when you look at these 12 traits of people who are successful in marriage, yeah, they're deeply biblical. And whether it's lifelong commitment, spiritual intimacy, that positive communication. I think in another part of the book I talk about the need for positive communication to be 5-to-1, 5 positive to every negative thing you might say, which those things do come out of my mouth occasionally. But healthy conflict in marriage, spending enjoyable time together, cherishing one another, nourishing one another. These are core things that make marriage work. And guess what? Whether it's liberal, conservative, these are common things that you find in all marriages where you have love for each other and it's expressed in this way. Those are good things. And I think if you deploy these attributes in your marriage and you believe in them, you're going to have a successful marriage and a wonderful life together, even though there will be difficulty.
I might just mention that the word intimacy comes up so often. Physical intimacy, you have a chapter obviously on sexual intimacy and things like that, spiritual intimacy, and it does seem to me that one of the other problems we have is, of course, people going into marriage that don't have any Christian commitment, any kind of spiritual nature. They're in a sense trying to put together a three-legged stool with only two legs. That's the first issue. But then also just this whole idea of intimacy. I know that's something you've struggled with because, again, as you have pointed out, growing up basically as an orphan, you've had to really be kind of self-sufficient. So for you, and I would imagine for lots of our listeners, including myself, intimacy sometimes is a difficulty. But if you're going to have a strong marriage, intimacy needs to be at its very core.
Very much so. And I think Jean, my wife, has been terrific at trying to open that part of my heart that I think was closed down because it was a pull yourself up by your bootstrap kind of environment for me. I started working at 11. I remember having to go to the junior high principal because I needed money. I needed to eat lunch. And I started working at a fast food place when I was 12, washing windows. And I had to go to the junior high principal to get a sign-off that I could do both school and work. But that's been the nature of it. And Jean and I, when we would talk about issues she was facing, maybe with her family or some other environment, I would have a tendency to say, well, if you just did this, this, and this, I mean, just come on, let's go. This would be the way to go. And one day she just looked at me, Kirby, and she said, Jim, not all of us could do that. I mean, you're able to do that. I am not. And I had to kind of figure out, oh, no. I mean, I looked at her and honestly said, really?
Really?
You can't do it? I mean, it was that foreign to me. And but it made a huge difference in the way I speak to my wife. Instead of giving her the solutions from my perspective, here's what you need to do, I'll say, well, how did that impact you? I mean, what is your thought about how you're going to solve that? Ask a question rather than give a directive. And we men fail at that constantly because you know what? It's just one more thing we need to get rid of. Let's do it. Let's solve the problem. And what our wives want to hear is we feel what they're feeling. And that's a good man who can develop that skill set. And you don't have to be born with it. Trust me, you're probably not as a guy. But you can develop the ability to listen to your wife.
Fascinating book, Marriage Done Right, One Man, One Woman, a section on the institution of marriage, one on your marriage, and then we just sort of mentioned in passing a few of those 12 traits of highly successful marriages. But before we run out of time, let me encourage everybody, Jim, to go to focusonthefamily.com, and we have a link to it in case people can't remember it, although I suspect most of our listeners have been there at one time or another. There are lots of great resources there on marriage and parenting, life changes, faith, social issues, being pro-life. For just a minute, talk about all the resources that are available through Focus on the Family.
Well, I appreciate that. Those are the core things. Evangelism, last year, 250,000 people came to Christ through Focus on the Family. I am thrilled with that number. 120,000 marriages saved. Parenting solutions for, I think, almost 800,000 couples sought us for marriage or parenting crisis counseling to help them get through a problem, typically with their teenagers. This is a treasure chest. Focus on the Family is of resources for you to tap. You don't need to pay for those. We certainly need support, but we're here for you. There's no question we haven't been asked, I don't think, over 40 years of ministry. And we want to be in the gap there, stand with you when you're having difficulties in your family. That's our primary mission, and to point you in the direction of the author of the family, and that's the Lord Jesus Christ. Those are our two passions. We're here for you. Call us.
I would again encourage you to listen to the radio broadcast, and if your radio station does not carry it, which I'm pretty sure most of them do, that would be the case. I've noticed some, though, have not put you at the best times. I know even in the local one here, you're on at 9:30 at night. I said, we got to change that or buy another radio station, get you on, because people aren't listening to you. They need to hear that in the morning or in the early afternoon. So we're going to do what we can to continue to promote Focus on the Family. We think so highly of the great work that is done there. I've known some of these individuals, as I alluded to at the very beginning, for decades now, which I guess makes me really old. But nevertheless, I hope that you'll go to focusonthefamily.com, find some of the resources that are available, or family.org. There are all sorts of places where you can find those resources. And most importantly, hope that you'll look for the book Marriage Done Right, One Man, One Woman. And if you can't find it, we have links, obviously, so that you can get it there. Jim Daly, just always great to have you on the program. Let's do it again sometime.
Thanks so much, Kirby. Great to talk with you, and thanks for coming out and visiting us here in the Rockies.
Well, we will do that. Let me again just encourage you to go to the website, pointofview.net. You're going to find information about the interviews we did both hours. And so if you find yourself saying, well, I'd like to listen to it again, the good news is we have podcasts. So you can download the podcast and listen to it. Maybe you would want to send that to somebody else and have them listen, or maybe you'd like to watch the interview. You can do so. Of course, we have a YouTube channel. It's all available at the website, pointofview.net. Now, just as we're going to the break, I thought I might mention that in the first hour, Stephen Coonts mentioned my commentary, and those commentaries air every single day at either 1:15, 2:15, or whenever you happen to listen to the program at various times, but a quarter after the hours, if you're listening on Central. Of course, it's different Eastern all the way to Pacific time. But those commentaries are also available to you, and we send them to your inbox. And if you'd like to read what I write every single day, that is available, and you can go to our website, pointofview.net. And especially today, you might want to see the one on the Internal Revenue Service, how they actually prevented all sorts of viable groups from getting their tax-exempt status. And I call it the IRS hit list. And so each day we do a commentary. I do one Monday through Friday. Penedexter's we air on Saturday, so you can have a chance to hear or read some of those, and they're available on our website. Of course, we have our Take Action items. We have some videos we've posted. And, of course, as you support this ministry, you're supporting the entire media ministry of Point of View. So please take the time, if you would, as we go off the air here, to click on that banner that says, "Will you stand for truth?" and encourage you to make a donation. It could be a small donation or a large donation, but in any case, it will be doubled, and that's something we encourage you to do before now and the end of our fiscal year. I want to thank Andrew, Catherine, and Shamila for their help behind the scenes. Have a great day. We'll see you back here tomorrow.
I want you to be honest for a minute. 10 years ago, did you think the Supreme Court would ever dare to redefine marriage? That a president would threaten schools unless they permit males to shower with your daughters, told hospitals they must do abortions and sex change procedures or lose federal money? Did you honestly foresee any of this? We must stand together today and defend our liberties, or in the next few years, the nation will be transformed in ways we can't imagine. Please, please, join Kirby and Point of View Radio and defend what's right. We have a June 30th deadline, the end of our fiscal year, and it's critical we finish this month on firm financial terms. Partner with us. Give the most generous gift you can, and right now, it will be doubled up to $10,000. Give online at pointofview.net. or call 1-800-347-5151. Thank you for standing with us to defend faith and family. Pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kirby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.